What if I told you that on a medieval bride's wedding night, she wasn't alone with her husband? What if I told you that complete strangers had to watch, document, and even participate in the most intimate moment of her life? Today we're diving into one of the most shocking and disturbing traditions in medieval history, the wedding night ceremony that was so invasive, so public, and so traumatic that it would be considered a crime today. From priests blessing the marriage bed to nobles witnessing the consummation, from bloody sheets displayed as trophies to the horrifying, bedding ceremony, we're about to explore why the medieval wedding night was less about love and more about legal contracts, family honor, and brutal social control. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some historians call the medieval wedding night legalized assault, and why the traditions were so extreme that they created some of the most violent wedding night stories in history. Let's start with the most shocking part, the bedding ceremony itself. This wasn't just about getting married, it was about proving the marriage was real, legal, and consummated in front of witnesses. Here's how it worked. After the wedding feast, the bride and groom would be escorted to their chamber by a procession of nobles, family members, and church officials. The bride would be undressed by the female wedding guests, while the groom was undressed by the men. This wasn't done privately, everyone was watching, commenting, and often making crude jokes. Once both were in bed, a priest would bless the marriage bed, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers. The bed itself was considered sacred, it had to be blessed, the sheets had to be new and white, and specific herbs like rosemary and lavender were scattered for fertility and protection. But here's the most disturbing part, witnesses didn't just watch the preparation. In many noble families, they stayed to witness the actual consummation. Family members, church officials, and sometimes even representatives from both families' allies would remain in the room or nearby chambers, listening for sounds that would prove the marriage was consummated. The intensity varied by region and social class. In France, the bedding ceremony was so elaborate it could last hours. In England, it was more restrained but still invasive. In Germanic regions, the witnesses were required to sign documents confirming what they had observed. But why was all this public humiliation necessary? The answer lies in medieval law and the obsession with proving virginity and consummation. The morning after the wedding night, the bloodied sheets had to be displayed publicly. This wasn't optional, it was a legal requirement. The blood proved the bride had been a virgin and that the marriage had been consummated, making it legally binding and impossible to annul. In many regions, the bloodied sheets were hung from the castle walls or displayed in the town square. Family members, church officials, and sometimes entire communities would inspect them. Some regions even had special ceremonies where the sheets were blessed by priests and kept as legal documents. If there was no blood, the consequences were catastrophic. The bride could be accused of not being a virgin, the marriage could be annulled, and both families could face legal and financial ruin. Some families kept chicken blood or other substances nearby, just in case. Of course, we know now that not all women bleed during first intercourse, but medieval people didn't understand this. They believed that all pure women would bleed, and the absence of blood was proof of sexual experience or even witchcraft. The witnesses weren't just there for show, they had to sign legal documents confirming what they had observed. These documents were kept by the church, the families, and sometimes even royal courts. They were considered as important as any other legal contract. Now let's talk about what this experience was actually like for the bride, and I need to warn you, this gets very dark. Most medieval brides were teenagers, often as young as 12 or 13. They had received no education about sex, no preparation for what was about to happen, and no choice in the matter. Their wedding night wasn't about love or romance, it was about fulfilling a legal and social obligation. Imagine being a 13-year-old girl, surrounded by drunk adults making crude jokes about your body, being physically undressed by strangers, and then expected to perform sexually while people listen from the next room. Many brides fainted, vomited, or had to be physically restrained. The groom wasn't necessarily more prepared or willing. Many medieval men were also young and inexperienced, but they faced enormous pressure to perform and prove their masculinity. If they failed to consummate the marriage, they could face mockery, legal consequences, and accusations of impotence. Medieval wedding nights were often violent. With no understanding of consent, no knowledge of anatomy, and enormous social pressure, many consummations were really cruel. The bride's pain and fear were considered normal, even expected. After the ordeal, the bride had to pretend everything was normal. She couldn't complain, couldn't seek help, and couldn't even discuss her trauma. She was expected to be grateful for being married and to immediately begin producing heirs. We have letters and diary entries from medieval women describing their terror of sexual intimacy, their fear of their husbands, and their desperate attempts to avoid pregnancy. Many developed what we would now recognize as severe PTSD. But why was medieval society so obsessed with controlling women's sexuality? The answer reveals a complex system of social control that went far beyond just marriage. Medieval marriage wasn't about love, it was about property. When a woman married, she brought a dowry, and when she died, her husband inherited everything. But this only worked if the children were definitely his. The wedding night witnesses weren't just ensuring consummation, they were ensuring the legitimacy of future heirs. Noble marriages were political alliances. If a marriage could be annulled for non-consummation, it could destroy carefully planned political relationships. The public nature of the wedding night made annulment much more difficult. The Catholic Church used marriage to control sexuality. By making the wedding night a religious ceremony with church oversight, they positioned themselves as the ultimate authority over sexual behavior. This gave them enormous power over both individuals and families. The public nature of the wedding night created a system of shame that controlled women's behavior long after marriage. Women who had been through this humiliation were less likely to rebel or seek independence, they had been broken by the system. The dowry system meant that a bride's family had enormous financial investment in proving her virginity. If she was found to be impure, the groom's family could demand the dowry back, potentially bankrupting the bride's family. Peasant weddings were less elaborate but equally invasive. Village communities would often gather outside the couple's home, listening for sounds of consummation and demanding proof in the morning. The lack of privacy was universal across all social classes. But not all medieval women accepted this system quietly. Some found ways to resist, rebel, or subvert these horrifying traditions. Some experienced women taught brides how to fake virginity. They would hide vials of animal blood, use certain herbs to create bleeding, or even inflict small cuts to produce the required proof. These deceptions were incredibly dangerous. If discovered, they could lead to accusations of witchcraft. Some noble families developed more private ceremonies to protect their daughters. They would still have witnesses, but they would be female relatives who were sworn to secrecy. The public display would be staged, while the actual wedding night was more private. Some couples found ways to use religious law to their advantage. They could claim divine visions, religious calling, or spiritual reasons for delaying consummation. This was risky but sometimes worked, especially if the family had church connections. We have records of brides who attempted to escape on their wedding night. Some succeeded in fleeing to convents, others were caught and faced severe punishment. These attempts were rare but show the desperation some women felt. Occasionally, grooms would refuse to participate in the public humiliation. They might stage the ceremony but protect their bride from the worst aspects. These men risked social consequences but sometimes prioritized their wife's well-being. By the later medieval period, some regions began to modify these traditions. The rise of courtly love culture and changing religious attitudes slowly made the most extreme practices less common, though they persisted in some areas for centuries. The medieval wedding night tradition had lasting effects that shaped European culture for centuries. These traditions established legal precedents about marriage, consent, and women's rights that persisted well into the modern era. The idea that marriage gave men unlimited sexual access to their wives was codified in laws that weren't changed until the 20th century. The systematic sexual trauma of medieval wedding nights created cultural patterns of fear and shame around sexuality that affected generations of women. Many wedding traditions we still follow today have their roots in these control mechanisms. The Renaissance brought some changes, but they were mainly for the wealthy. The rise of humanist philosophy and changing attitudes toward marriage slowly made the most extreme practices less common, though they never disappeared entirely. Sadly, similar practices still exist in some parts of the world today. Forced marriage, virginity testing, and public proof of consummation are still practiced in certain cultures, showing how persistent these control mechanisms can be. Modern feminist historians have re-examined these traditions and highlighted how they represent systematic sexual violence sanctioned by law, religion, and society. They argue that understanding this history is crucial for recognizing how far we've come and how far we still need to go. So what was a medieval bride's first night really like? It was a traumatic, public, and legally mandated ordeal that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with social control, property rights, and male dominance. Behind every romantic medieval wedding story was a terrified teenage girl facing sexual violence while complete strangers watched and documented her humiliation. This wasn't an aberration, it was the norm for centuries. Understanding these traditions helps us recognize how recent our concepts of consent, privacy, and women's rights really are. It also reminds us that progress isn't inevitable. Rights that seem fundamental today were fought for by countless women throughout history. What other dark medieval traditions should we explore? The brutal reality of medieval childbirth? The shocking truth about medieval medicine? Let me know in the comments below, and remember, understanding history means facing its darkest chapters, not just the romanticized versions.